The moment Meghan Markle stepped onto the Paris red carpet, the air shifted. It was subtle at first, a ripple through the crowd, a pause in the chatter, a collective breath held. And then, the cameras caught it. The whispers, the sideways glances, the pointed stares. Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, dressed head to toe in an immaculate white Balenciaga ensemble, with a flowing cape that trailed elegantly behind her, could feel it. Something was off. Paris, a city that had long embraced the audacious and the avant-garde, suddenly seemed to turn on her. And not quietly. For a city famous for its sophistication and diplomacy, the reaction was startling. In the very first steps across the red carpet, snippets of sound leaked into the microphones of the assembled media. A jeer here, a murmur of "You're no Diana" there. The words cut sharper than any blade, sharper than any critique her team of stylists or PR strategists could have anticipated. Meghan's polished smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. But in that split second, the cameras captured the crack in her composure, a crack that would widen as the night unfolded. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The backdrop of this moment was not just fashion, fame, or celebrity. It was history, memory, and grief. Meghan had, a few days earlier, shared a video from her limousine near the Pont d'Alma tunnel, the place where Princess Diana had tragically lost her life decades ago. In the video, Meghan reclined, her feet up, a serene smile on her face, completely unaware, or perhaps indifferent, to how the act would be received. What might have seemed innocent to some was received by many as a provocation. The video spread across social media like wildfire. Parisian news outlets, already sensitive to Diana's legacy, framed it as insensitive and in poor taste. The Duchess had, intentionally or not, invoked the ghost of Diana in a way that stirred raw, emotional reactions from a city still haunted by the past. And so, when Meghan arrived at the Balenciaga Women's Wear Spring-Summer 2026 show, she was not just stepping into the limelight. She was stepping into a gauntlet of scrutiny, judgment, and historical comparison. Every eye on the red carpet was weighing her presence against the memory of a beloved princess. Every whisper, every murmur, carried the weight of decades of public adoration for Diana, and every misstep would be magnified. Meghan's all-white ensemble, chosen with impeccable fashion foresight, took on a different significance under the glare of public attention. White, a color often associated with purity, elegance, and new beginnings, was now laden with irony. Was it an homage? A statement? Or merely a wardrobe choice blown out of proportion by history and grief? Questions swirled like the soft Parisian wind through the crowd. And yet, Meghan, seasoned by years in front of cameras and flashing lights, tried to maintain her composure. A soft, measured smile, hands clasped elegantly. The image of poise. The image of confidence. But inside, the pressure mounted, invisible yet inescapable. The boos were faint at first, almost imperceptible amidst the orchestration of photographers' clicks and flashes. But soon, they grew louder, more coordinated, more impossible to ignore. A ripple became a wave. A wave became a roar. "You're no Diana," shouted a voice, cutting through the high-pitched whir of cameras. Another added, "Go home." The crowd, filled with a mix of fashion enthusiasts, paparazzi, and die-hard Diana fans, was not holding back. The jeers were not just at Meghan's outfit, nor at her celebrity. They were at her very presence, a living embodiment of tension between old loyalties and new narratives. The sound of boos, once a rare and shocking event for Meghan, now became a defining feature of the evening. Every step she took across the red carpet was punctuated by an almost physical wall of judgment. It wasn't only the words, either. The cameras caught subtle gestures, fans turning their backs, fingers pointed, whispers exchanged. Even among some of the celebrity attendees, eyebrows raised, and murmurs passed between influential figures. It was as if the atmosphere itself had shifted. Paris, the city of light, suddenly felt heavy, almost oppressive, around Meghan. She had learned, through past experiences, that public opinion could be volatile, yet nothing could have prepared her for this. The combination of historical sensitivity, viral social media outrage, and live, in-person jeering created a perfect storm. Meghan's mental resilience was being tested in a way that merged personal grief, public scrutiny, and global media exposure into a singular, intense pressure cooker moment. One misstep, one faltered smile, one tremor in her hand, could be analyzed endlessly across headlines, video clips, and commentary shows for weeks, if not months. The incident also highlighted the complicated interplay of celebrity, royalty, and media in the 21st century. Meghan, once a television actress with a public accustomed to stage narratives, had entered a different kind of arena. One where the audience carried not just opinions, but legacies, histories, and emotions. Where her every action, every smile, every sigh, could be read as symbolic, intentional, or disrespectful. The line between personal choice and public consequence had blurred, and she was living in that liminal space under the brightest of spotlights. But beyond the boos and the judgment, there was also the silent tension backstage. Fashion insiders whispered, some in admiration of her style, others in disbelief at the reaction she had provoked. Cameras panned, trying to catch a reaction, any hint of defiance or apology. Reporters jostled to capture the soundbite that could define the evening. In those moments, Meghan's team scrambled, whispering instructions, trying to shield her from escalating humiliation while still maintaining the optics of composure and dignity. The strategy of poise clashed with the reality of human emotion, creating a delicate balancing act that could easily tip at any moment. And yet, as Meghan paused to allow photographers their shots, there was a tremor in her expression that went unnoticed by many but captured by the ever-watchful lenses. A flicker of doubt, a flash of vulnerability, a silent questioning of how she had arrived at this moment. In that pause, the world saw not just a duchess, not just a celebrity, but a woman grappling with the magnitude of public expectation, legacy, and personal consequence. It was a raw, unguarded human moment masked by the polish of couture and jewelry. Paris had become a theater of judgment, and Meghan, the unwilling protagonist, was center stage. The interplay of glamour and grief, spectacle and scrutiny, history and present, created a tension that seemed almost unbearable. Every movement was laden with meaning. Every glance, every sigh, every blink was dissected. And in the midst of it all, Meghan had to navigate not just fashion but emotion, legacy, and public perception simultaneously. It was a test of resilience unlike any she had faced before. But the story of that night did not end with the red carpet. In fact, what the cameras missed, what the public did not yet see, was only the beginning. Backstage whispers hinted at confrontations with fashion insiders. Rumors circulated that certain celebrities had refused to pose with her. Texts leaked among palace insiders revealed a storm of concern. Social media chatter predicted even more explosive reactions in the following hours. Paris, in its quiet sophistication, had set the stage for a spectacle that would ripple far beyond the glittering lights of the runway. And yet, through all of this, Meghan moved forward. Each step measured, each smile curated, each interaction calculated. But beneath the surface, emotions threatened to overwhelm the carefully constructed exterior. The question loomed, would she maintain composure, or would the pressure finally break through? The world watched, poised for every flicker of imperfection, every hint of human vulnerability. And what came next, behind closed doors, in private conversations, in whispered confrontations, would change everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The red carpet stretched out like a river of light, lined with flashing cameras, murmuring crowds, and the unmistakable hum of anticipation. For most guests, this was a night of glamour and prestige, a chance to be photographed among the glitterati of the fashion world. But for Meghan Markle, it was something else entirely. It was a crucible, a moment that would test her poise, her resilience, and her ability to navigate the delicate, invisible line between admiration and public scorn. The first step onto that red carpet was more than a physical movement. It was a symbolic act, a confrontation with history itself. Meghan's all-white Balenciaga ensemble shimmered under the lights. The fabric, perfectly tailored, hugged her frame while a flowing cape trailed elegantly behind her, catching the flashes of photographers' bulbs in dramatic bursts. Every detail had been meticulously planned. Her hair slicked back into a tight bun, black satin heels with pointed toes, a small black purse held delicately in one hand. It was a visual statement of power, grace, and sophistication. But in Paris that night, no amount of style could insulate her from scrutiny. From the moment she appeared, the crowd reacted. At first, it was subtle. A shift in posture, a slight narrowing of eyes, a whisper carried through the air. But those whispers quickly grew, gaining volume and confidence. Voices called out, some playful, some cutting, and some scathing. "You're no Diana," a woman shouted, her voice laced with both anger and nostalgia. Another voice followed, sharp and biting, "Go home." The jeers collided with the clicking of cameras, creating a chaotic symphony of judgment. Meghan's carefully constructed exterior, the Duchess poised, the actress trained for the public eye, began to feel the pressure of real, unfiltered emotion directed squarely at her. It wasn't just the words that stung, it was the history, the legacy, the memory that surrounded them. Paris had not forgotten Diana. They had mourned her publicly and privately, revered her image, and turned her life into a symbol of grace under pressure, tragedy under the media's relentless glare. By appearing in Paris, and especially with the recent limousine video near the Pont d'Alma tunnel, Meghan had stepped into a minefield of emotion. Every step she took was measured against Diana's legacy, every movement dissected, every gesture interpreted as intentional or provocative. The photographers were relentless. Each flash, each angle, each carefully framed shot was captured for the tabloids, social media, and fashion blogs. Cameras followed her every movement, zooming in on her expression, her posture, her eyes. Every detail mattered, because the world would interpret them. A small smile could be seen as arrogance. A faint tremor could be construed as fear. Meghan's team whispered advice, giving directions, adjusting angles, trying to shield her from what they feared could escalate. But the crowd's energy was impossible to contain. The noise grew, a physical wave pressing against her as she moved forward. Meghan could feel it, the weight of expectation, of judgment, of history pressing down on her. The crowd wasn't just reacting to a duchess. Even the media commentators were split. Some lauded her poise, while others dissected her every action as tone-deaf or provocative. It was a live performance of perception, and Meghan was both actor and subject, navigating a narrative she could not fully control. And yet, amidst all this, there was a strange kind of power in her presence. Meghan's very visibility forced the crowd to confront their own feelings about history, celebrity, and identity. Her choice to appear, despite recent controversies, was audacious. It was bold. It was calculated, and perhaps a little reckless. There was courage in that, even if the moment threatened to unravel around her. It was a delicate dance between visibility and vulnerability, between statement and scrutiny, and Meghan was moving carefully, step by step, across the figurative and literal carpet laid out before her. Then came the voices, louder this time, cutting through the buzz of photography and hushed commentary. A man called out sharply, "Disrespectful." Another voice, feminine, echoed with bitterness, "She thinks she's Diana." The jeers were no longer a background murmur. They were a direct confrontation. The crowd, which had been simmering with judgment, now expressed their disapproval with clarity and force. It was a baptism of fire, an unfiltered reception from a public unwilling to separate Meghan the person from Meghan the narrative. And there, in the midst of flashes and whispers, Meghan faltered, just slightly. The smile she had maintained wavered, and for the briefest moment, her eyes betrayed the whirlwind of emotion inside her: surprise, fear, a flicker of shame. But she recovered quickly, recalibrating her expression, straightening her posture, and moving forward with purpose. Still, the cameras caught every nuance, every subtle tremor, every flicker of doubt. In those seconds, the world was watching, waiting, and recording history in real time. Backstage, whispers escalated. Fashion insiders discussed the spectacle in hushed tones, some expressing sympathy, others critique. Rumors circulated among the staff about Meghan's previous limousine video, the Pont d'Alma incident, and how it had inflamed tensions. Every move she made on the red carpet was now analyzed in light of that video, creating a feedback loop of scrutiny that intensified the moment. Her team whispered guidance, repositioned cameras, and tried to ensure she maintained dignity. even as the crowd's reaction threatened to overwhelm her carefully curated image. And yet, as Meghan navigated the final stretch of the red carpet, something unexpected happened. A small faction of supporters emerged from the crowd, raising voices in defense, murmuring encouragement, applauding subtle gestures of elegance. It was not enough to silence the jeers, but it was a reminder that in the chaos of public opinion, there were still pockets of solidarity, unexpected moments of validation that offered a fragile lifeline amid the storm. Meghan's expression softened momentarily, acknowledging these voices, a tiny but potent sign that even in adversity, perception could be balanced, if only slightly. But the evening was far from over. The initial confrontation on the red carpet was just the opening act. Backstage, more drama was brewing. Whispered conversations among designers, tense interactions with other celebrities, and the looming shadow of media scrutiny that promised to follow every move. The night was young, and Paris was not done testing Meghan. Each step she had taken so far was a prelude to greater challenges, more intense scrutiny, and emotional tests that would demand resilience she had not yet fully deployed. The cameras had captured the beginning, but the story, the full story, was only starting to unfold. As she passed the final photographers and approached the entrance to the Balenciaga show, Meghan felt the eyes of Paris upon her. Not just the cameras, not just the crowd, but the collective memory of a city still haunted by grief, legacy, and expectation. She knew, even as she moved forward with composure, that this night would be dissected endlessly. Every smile, every gesture, every step would be analyzed, debated, and repurposed for narratives she could not fully control. And somewhere in the crowd, the echoes of "You're no Diana" lingered, a haunting refrain that underscored the precarious tightrope she was walking between public fascination and public judgment. The red carpet was only the beginning. What happened next? Inside the show, behind the curtains, in whispered conversations with fashion insiders and celebrities, would escalate in ways no one could anticipate. Paris, a city synonymous with style, sophistication, and poise, had become a crucible. And Meghan, in her luminous white ensemble, had become the lightning rod for all that tension, controversy, and historical weight. The night had begun with flashes of cameras, whispers of judgment, and the first stirrings of boos. But what would unfold behind the scenes would challenge her in ways far beyond what any public appearance could predict. But what happened backstage, in the moments just after she passed the final photographers, would set the stage for a drama that few expected, and one that would send shockwaves through both the fashion world and the royal narrative. It all started before the red carpet, before the flashes, the cameras, the jeers, and the whispers. Before Paris had even caught its first glimpse of Meghan Markle in her striking all-white Balenciaga ensemble, there was the limousine video. A short clip, posted casually to social media, showing the Duchess of Sussex reclining in the back seat of a luxurious Parisian vehicle, her feet resting delicately on the seat opposite her, a soft smile playing on her lips. On the surface, it seemed mundane, almost ordinary. A glimpse into a moment of calm before a glamorous appearance. But in Paris, nothing is ever just ordinary, especially when the past whispers from the corners of memory. The location of the video was what turned it into a powder keg. The limousine glided past the Pont d'Alma tunnel, the site of Princess Diana's tragic accident in 1997. For Parisians and Diana's global admirers, the tunnel was hallowed ground, a space imbued with grief, memory, and reverence. By placing herself in that space, feet up, relaxed, seemingly unconcerned with the symbolism, Meghan had ignited a storm. People saw it as a disregard for history, a casual, almost flippant action that was impossible to separate from the weight of Diana's legacy. The video spread like wildfire. Social media erupted within hours. Parisian outlets labeled the act as insensitive, provocative, and even distasteful. Across the Atlantic, British tabloids went further, framing it as an intentional slight, a moment of narcissistic spectacle. Clips were shared endlessly, juxtaposed with images of Diana's own elegance and poise in Paris decades earlier. Headlines screamed interpretations, opinions, and judgments, each one more dramatic than the last. Markle invokes Diana. Paris outraged. One outlet read, "The Duchess who dared," another announced. Within a matter of hours, a short, casual video had morphed into a global controversy. For Meghan, the impact was immediate but complicated. On one hand, she was accustomed to scrutiny. She had spent years in front of cameras, navigating the unpredictable world of public attention as an actress and a member of the royal family. On the other hand, this was different. This was not just celebrity commentary or tabloid gossip. It was Paris, a city that still mourned, still remembered, still revered Diana. And in that context, Meghan's actions were interpreted not just as a lapse in judgment, but as a direct affront, a symbolic overstep that triggered deep emotional responses. The timing of the video intensified the reaction. It had been released just days before her appearance at the Balenciaga show. The public, already sensitive to her presence in Paris, had this additional evidence to shape their expectations, their attitudes, and their eventual reactions on the red carpet. The video became a lens through which every movement, every gesture, every step would be scrutinized. Her very existence in Paris was no longer neutral. It was a statement, whether intended or not. And Paris was ready to respond. Critics dissected every element of the video. Her posture, they said, suggested arrogance. Her relaxed demeanor implied indifference. Even the choice of music playing faintly in the background, the framing of the camera, the soft smile, everything was interpreted, judged, and analyzed. Social media debates erupted. Was it a genuine moment of relaxation or a calculated provocation? Was she daring the city to judge her, or was she simply unaware of the emotional weight she carried? Every interpretation added fuel to the fire. Meanwhile, the video created a ripple effect beyond public perception. Backstage, fashion insiders, designers, and stylists discussed it in hushed tones. Some sympathized with Meghan, arguing that no single individual could reasonably be expected to shoulder the weight of collective grief and memory. Others were harsher, suggesting that she had misjudged the cultural sensitivity of her audience, and that her actions had repercussions for her standing in the fashion world. The gossip swirled. Which celebrities had seen it? Which designers were furious? Who had texted warnings behind the scenes? The video, short and seemingly innocuous, had triggered a cascade of tension that would follow her to the red carpet. The public's reaction was equally intense. Fans of Princess Diana, especially those who felt a personal connection to her memory, took to social media in outrage. Parisian locals wrote open letters online. Hashtags circulated, blending grief with criticism, some polite, others scathing. Markle shows no respect at Diana's site trended internationally. Across news feeds, screens, and television monitors, the narrative was clear. Meghan's actions had violated an unspoken code of reverence. Her presence in Paris, once anticipated with curiosity, was now fraught with judgment. Yet, amidst the criticism, there were nuances often lost in the frenzy. Some commentators noted that Meghan might have intended no disrespect, that the act was casual, private, or even innocent. Others speculated that she was aware of the symbolism and chose to act anyway, using the location for subtle messaging. The ambiguity added layers to the controversy, making it impossible to reduce to a simple narrative of right or wrong. This gray area only heightened public fascination, fueling debate, speculation, and, ultimately, the intense response she would encounter on the red carpet. The limousine video also revealed a more personal dimension of Meghan's experience. Reports suggested that in the moments before and after recording, she had been alone, reflecting, waiting, perhaps even rehearsing her composure for the upcoming appearance. It was a human moment, fleeting and intimate, yet publicized instantly for the world to interpret. To critics, it appeared calculated. To supporters, it was natural, relatable, and understandable. The polarity of perception underscored the complexity of Meghan's position. Every act was layered, every choice magnified, every gesture scrutinized. As the video circulated, it shaped the expectations of those who would confront her in person. By the time Meghan arrived at the Balenciaga show, the whispers had turned into audible anticipation. Some in the crowd had already formed opinions about her character, informed entirely by the viral clip. Their response on the red carpet was a mixture of outrage, curiosity, and historical reverence, all projected onto a single figure, Meghan. The video had set the stage for confrontation, making the ensuing boos and jeers almost inevitable. Inside the palace and Meghan's own team, there was alarm. Advisors debated damage control strategies. Should she acknowledge the video publicly? Should she issue a statement? Should she avoid the media entirely upon arrival? Each option had pros and cons, and the clock was ticking. The red carpet was minutes away. The storm of public opinion, fueled by a simple video, was ready to meet her in full force. And meet her it did. When she stepped out of her car, cameras capturing every detail, the reaction was immediate. Whispers and murmurs from the crowd morphed into audible jeers. A few brave or angry voices shouted, drawing attention from the entire assembly. "You're no Diana," a woman cried, echoing the sentiment that had simmered online and now erupted in person. "Go home," added a man, his anger palpable. Meghan's team tried to shield her from the brunt of the confrontation, but the noise was relentless. The video had primed the crowd, created expectations, and now those expectations were being violently fulfilled. In that moment, it became clear that the limousine video was not a prelude. It was a catalyst. It had transformed a standard fashion appearance into a dramatic confrontation with history, grief, and public perception. The crowd's reaction was as much about Meghan herself as it was about Diana, about Paris, about the narratives people construct around legacy and memory. A private, fleeting act had become a symbol, a statement, and a source of intense public scrutiny. But the controversy didn't end there. The viral spread of the video meant that international audiences were watching in real time. News channels dissected her posture, the angle of her legs, the expression on her face. Social media exploded with memes, reaction videos, and debates about respect, privilege, and sensitivity. Experts in media and celebrity culture weighed in, predicting long-term impacts on Meghan's public image, fashion collaborations, and royal standing. The small limousine video had grown into a global phenomenon, a flashpoint of discussion, and a precursor to the very public confrontation she would face minutes later. And yet, amid all the criticism, there remained an undercurrent of sympathy. Some recognized the pressure Meghan faced, the unrelenting media, the impossible standards, the constant comparison to an icon who could never be replaced. For them, the video was a humanizing moment, a glimpse into vulnerability, a reminder that even the most polished public figures have private lives, moments of repose, and simple human behaviors that can be misconstrued or weaponized in the court of public opinion. The limousine video controversy had done more than capture a fleeting moment. It had set a narrative in motion. It framed Meghan's arrival at the Paris Fashion Week as an inevitable clash between past and present, grief and spectacle, respect and rebellion. It turned ordinary observers into participants in a historical debate. It prepared the crowd, primed the media, and created a tense, almost electric atmosphere that would define the night. But what happened when that video met the live audience? The crowd that had been primed, the Parisian fans, the journalists, the influencers, the Diana devotees, would push the evening from tense to explosive. The limousine video had been the spark. Now, the flames were ready to consume the red carpet. And behind the scenes, whispers began to circulate of a confrontation backstage, an interaction that would shock even the most seasoned observers. A designer, a model, or perhaps even a member of the royal entourage had prepared to confront her, to challenge, or to question. The implications of that interaction, fueled by a simple social media video, were yet to unfold. And they promised to escalate the drama far beyond what anyone could anticipate. The limousine video was no longer just a clip. It was the harbinger of chaos. But what came next, when Meghan faced the crowd in Paris directly, would test her composure, her dignity, and her resilience like never before. And what unfolded on that red carpet would be remembered for years as one of the most dramatic intersections of celebrity, royalty, and historical memory the city had ever witnessed. No one steps into Paris without sensing its history, its culture, its elegance. But Meghan Markle was stepping into something far more intangible, far more powerful, the shadow of Princess Diana. It is one thing to walk into a city famed for fashion and flair. It is another to walk into a city that still mourns, remembers, and venerates a woman who, decades later, remains an icon of grace, tragedy, and public scrutiny. Diana's presence in Paris had been legendary, her style, poise, and charisma unforgettable. Every street corner, every cafe, every camera angle that had once captured Diana's light now seemed to weigh upon Meghan as she made her entrance. The shadow was not metaphorical. It was felt in the air, in the whispers of the crowd, in the murmured comparisons that flitted between admirers and critics alike. "You're no Diana," someone shouted. And those words echoed louder than the camera flashes, louder than the click of stilettos against the red carpet. For Diana's fans, for Parisians who remembered her elegance and tragedy, Meghan represented a new chapter, a disruption, a challenge, a comparison that was impossible to ignore. The public's perception had been shaped long before Meghan arrived, informed by decades of media narrative, emotional attachment, and historical reverence. She was, in essence, walking into a story already written, and every step she took would be measured against an icon who could never be replicated. The weight of that comparison was crushing. To some, Meghan's presence was a provocation, an unintentional but glaring affront. To others, it was simply history repeating itself, another figure, another princess, another public narrative colliding with the impossibility of expectation. In the city where Diana had been adored, photographed, and immortalized, Meghan was an interloper. Every gesture, every smile, every glance was scrutinized through the lens of legacy. Even her choice of all-white attire, so often associated with elegance and poise, was interpreted as a statement, a subtle nod, or, in the eyes of some, a miscalculated homage. And yet, Meghan's own awareness of that shadow, her understanding of history, her knowledge of the scrutiny she would face, made the evening all the more precarious. She had to navigate not just her appearance, but the symbolism imbued in every step. The limousine video near the Pont d'Alma tunnel had already made headlines, and now her physical presence on the red carpet amplified the tension. This was no longer about fashion. It was about legacy, grief, and the public's insatiable desire to witness history unfold in real time. Diana's shadow wasn't just a memory. It was an active, living presence that influenced reactions, interpretations, and judgment. Paris, as always, was a city of optics. Every cafe terrace, every lamppost, every passerby contributed to the visual tableau that would be captured by media outlets around the world. Photographers positioned themselves strategically, aware that Meghan's interaction with the crowd could generate the images that defined the narrative. Diana's legacy, captured in glossy magazine spreads and viral videos for decades, had set a standard of elegance, dignity, and relatability that was nearly impossible to meet. Meghan's every choice, pose, expression, accessory, was now contrasted against that standard, magnified through the lens of comparison. The public's reaction was intensified by decades of storytelling. Media outlets had canonized Diana as the people's princess, a figure whose every action, every smile, every gesture was elevated into legend. That canonization created a framework in which Meghan's presence was not merely interpreted as contemporary fashion or celebrity, but as a challenge to a cultural memory. Each boo, each sideways glance, each whispered, "You're no Diana," was informed by this historical narrative. Paris, a city already attuned to nuance, style, and drama, responded with a heightened sensitivity that few outside the city could fully comprehend. For Meghan, the challenge was dual. Not only did she have to maintain composure under direct public scrutiny, but she also had to navigate the intangible, pervasive presence of history and memory. Her body language, facial expressions, and demeanor were all interpreted as signals: confidence or arrogance, respect or disrespect, homage or hubris. Even her silence, her pauses, her careful steps were amplified, dissected, and discussed in the context of Diana's legacy. The shadow she walked under was not static. It was alive, dynamic, and unrelenting. And there was irony in the situation. Diana herself had faced relentless public scrutiny, paparazzi, and social judgment, often navigating moments of intense pressure with grace and dignity. Meghan, aware of these parallels, may have sought to emulate some of that poise, yet the circumstances were different. Diana had been adored in Paris, celebrated even in tragedy. Meghan faced a crowd conditioned by history, primed by viral social media outrage, and attuned to every nuance of perceived misstep. The comparison was almost impossible to navigate fairly. The past had set the rules, and Meghan was playing a game with no clear guidelines, judged by standards created before she arrived. The shadow extended beyond the red carpet. Social media amplified the narrative exponentially. Clips of Meghan's limousine video juxtaposed with historical footage of Diana circulated endlessly, accompanied by commentary, opinion pieces, and heated debates. Parisian journalists analyzed every move, framing Meghan as either a daring modern figure or an insensitive intruder. International media picked up the story, extending the shadow across continents. The Duchess's actions, once private or personal, had been absorbed into a cultural discourse about legacy, grief, and expectation. Every image, every gesture, every word had the power to shape perception, to influence judgment, to reinforce or challenge narratives built over decades. Even among the crowd, the effect of Diana's shadow was evident. Murmurs rippled through clusters of spectators, whispers comparing Meghan to the late princess, critiques of posture, style, demeanor, and perceived attitude. Some jeered directly, others whispered among themselves, sharing interpretations, opinions, and judgments. The cultural weight was palpable. Diana's memory, immortalized in photographs, documentaries, and the collective consciousness, hung over the proceedings like a specter. Meghan's every action was now a response to, or measured against, that legacy, intentionally or not. And yet, within that shadow, there was also opportunity. Meghan had, perhaps unconsciously, entered a narrative space that few public figures could navigate. The space between homage and reinterpretation, between past and present, between scrutiny and resilience. How she moved, how she responded, and how she carried herself in the face of boos, whispers, and historical weight could define her public image for years. It was a moment of peril, yes, but also a chance to assert her identity, her poise, and her capacity to endure under scrutiny unlike any other. But the pressure was immense. The crowd's energy shifted from curiosity to judgment, from observation to confrontation. Whispers grew into audible shouts, and the camera lenses captured expressions of surprise, shock, and even anger from bystanders. The jeers were interspersed with muttered comments about Diana, loyalty, and the weight of legacy. Every movement Meghan made was scrutinized, evaluated against the gold standard of Diana's memory. The shadow was not just metaphorical. It was a living, breathing force acting upon her in real time. In the midst of this tension, Meghan's own emotional experience was complex. She was not just aware of the crowd, the media, or history. She was acutely conscious of the expectations placed upon her as a modern duchess, as a figure navigating royalty and celebrity, and as a woman constantly compared to an icon. The emotional stakes were high. Embarrassment, anxiety, and self-doubt mingled with determination, poise, and the desire to command the moment on her own terms. Every heartbeat, every blink, every step carried weight beyond what most people could fathom. And then, as if the tension alone were not enough, the crowd erupted. A voice, sharp and cutting, rang out. "You're no Diana." The words reverberated, bouncing from cobblestone to flashing cameras, and onto screens around the world. Others followed. Disrespectful. Go home. The collective judgment was immediate and unrelenting. Meghan's composure was tested, her poise strained under the weight of historical memory, social expectation, and immediate confrontation. The shadow had become a spotlight, and it was focused entirely on her. The presence of Diana's shadow was more than historical. It was emotional, psychological, and cultural. It shaped reactions, interpretations, and judgments. It was the lens through which every gesture, every smile, every step was filtered. And as the evening progressed, it would not release its hold. Paris, a city of history, culture, and refined taste, had become a stage upon which Meghan's ability to navigate legacy, expectation, and public scrutiny would be tested in ways that few could survive unscathed. And backstage, beyond the cameras and the red carpet, the murmurs of fashion insiders, designers, and publicists hinted at what was coming next. Whispers of confrontation, discussion, and speculation circulated rapidly, suggesting that the shadow of Diana would not only haunt Meghan in public, but also shaped the interactions she would have behind the scenes. Every comment, every look, every whispered word promised to escalate the tension to a breaking point. But what happened next, when Meghan faced the crowd directly on the red carpet, confronted not just by their eyes, but by the living presence of history itself, would transform the evening into a moment of public drama that no one would forget. The red carpet had become a battleground. What had started as flashes of light, polite murmurs, and polite curiosity had transformed into an arena of judgment. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, walked slowly, deliberately, her flowing white Balenciaga cape brushing against the polished marble beneath her feet. Every step felt weighted with expectation, history, and an almost tangible tension that hung over the crowd like a storm cloud ready to burst. She was not just entering a fashion event. She was stepping into the collective memory of a city, into the gaze of a crowd prepared to measure her against the unapproachable ideal of Princess Diana. The jeers began softly at first, a ripple in the crowd that could have been ignored, drowned out by the flashes and the murmurs of polite applause. But then, almost imperceptibly, they gained strength. Voices rose, overlapping with the clatter of cameras, creating a discordant symphony that demanded attention. "You're no Diana," a sharp, cutting voice shouted, carried clearly over the chatter. Another added, "Go home." The words were not just criticisms. They were declarations, judgments, and accusations, delivered in a city that had long held Diana in a kind of sacred reverence. Meghan's smile, carefully maintained, faltered just for a heartbeat. The cameras caught it, the brief, human tremor that betrayed the emotional weight of the moment. For a split second, the polished composure, the decades of media training, and the cultivated poise all seemed to waver under the unrelenting scrutiny. But she forced herself to straighten her posture, smooth her cape, and lift her chin. Every motion was a careful negotiation between authenticity and expectation, between human reaction and public performance. The crowd was relentless. It was no longer just whispers or subtle hints of disapproval. They had coalesced into a chorus of confrontation, fueled in part by the viral limousine video, the history of Diana's presence in Paris, and the global discussion that had erupted online. Each boo, each shouted phrase, each pointed finger carried a weight that was both immediate and symbolic. Meghan was no longer simply a public figure. She had become a vessel for collective memory, for grief, for anger, and for the impossible standards that had been set decades earlier. And the psychological pressure was immense. Meghan could feel the gaze of every camera, every journalist, every attendee on her. Each click of a shutter was a judgment, each lens a magnifying glass on her composure. Her steps, carefully measured and deliberate, felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm of expectation and history. Every footfall was amplified, every gesture dissected. Even the slightest flick of an eyelash or twitch of her hand could be interpreted as arrogance, indifference, or defiance. The jeers escalated. A woman in the crowd, young and fiercely vocal, shouted again, "You think you're Diana?" The words struck with precision, like an arrow finding a target. Another, older, added, "Markle, show some respect." The audience, a mixture of Diana loyalists, fashion enthusiasts, and media personnel, was no longer an impartial observer. They were participants in a drama that had been brewing for decades, and Meghan was at the center, the unwitting protagonist. For Meghan, the experience was a collision of professional training and raw human emotion. She had spent years learning how to present herself, how to navigate public events with dignity, and how to maintain composure under scrutiny. Yet this was different. This was not just criticism of fashion choices, career decisions, or personal life. This was judgment filtered through grief, memory, and history. It was as if the city itself, shaped by decades of mourning, adoration, and narrative construction, had risen to test her. And she faltered, not in a dramatic collapse, not in an overt gesture, but subtly, quietly. The brief tightening of her jaw, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the almost imperceptible pause in her stride. These moments, small as they were magnified through cameras, recorded for posterity, and instantly scrutinized across the globe. The world was watching, interpreting, and judging in real time. Yet Meghan's response was measured. She forced herself to smile, to maintain a posture that projected calm and control, to navigate the crowd with the elegance expected of someone in her position. She understood the stakes. To show too much emotion would be perceived as weakness, too little as arrogance. Each microexpression, each flicker of emotion, was a negotiation with the expectations of both history and contemporary public scrutiny. The flashes of cameras illuminated the tension further. Each photographer's lens seemed to capture not just her image, but the emotional narrative that swirled around her. The contrast between glamour and grief, between public expectation and personal intent. Her white ensemble, once a symbol of elegance, now seemed a canvas upon which every judgment, every criticism, every historical comparison could be projected. The crowd was no longer observing Meghan. They were interpreting, judging, and assigning meaning to her every gesture. Voices continued to rise, some jeering, others whispering in shock or disapproval. The phrase, "You're no Diana," was repeated, amplified, and echoed through social media channels within minutes. The jeers were no longer background noise. They were the soundtrack of the evening, an audible reminder of the weight of expectation. Meghan, navigating the red carpet, was simultaneously performer, observer, and subject of scrutiny. Every calculated motion, every carefully maintained expression, was a response to a historical, cultural, and emotional minefield. And yet, amid the criticism and tension, a strange form of resilience began to emerge. Meghan's steps remained deliberate, her expression controlled, her poise intact. She understood that the red carpet confrontation, as humiliating and challenging as it was a moment she had to endure with dignity. The audience's judgment was fierce, but her response was equally calculated. She projected grace under pressure, a lesson in resilience that few could fully appreciate in the immediacy of the moment. Backstage, whispers escalated. Designers, stylists, and media insiders speculated about the unfolding scene. Some predicted further confrontation, while others noted the resilience and control Meghan displayed despite the barrage of criticism. The tension between public perception and backstage speculation heightened the stakes. Every movement on the red carpet could influence how insiders perceived her, how the media framed the narrative, and how the public would react in the days to come. And yet, the most human, vulnerable moment arrived subtly, almost imperceptibly. Meghan's eyes glistened slightly, a hint of tears threatening to escape. The pressure of the jeers, the historical comparisons, the viral videos, and the weight of public scrutiny had reached a peak. She blinked rapidly, a small, private effort to regain composure, but the cameras captured it. In that fleeting instant, the world glimpsed a human beneath the curated public persona, a woman navigating criticism, expectation, and the legacy of another icon. The crowd sensed the shift, too. The intensity of their reaction persisted, yet some voices softened, replaced by murmurs of surprise or curiosity. Meghan's emotional vulnerability, though subtle, introduced a new layer to the evening's drama. It was no longer just judgment. It was empathy, speculation, and the realization that the person on the red carpet was more than a symbol. She was human, flawed, and deeply aware of the historical and emotional stakes surrounding her presence. And then, the crescendo. A particularly vocal section of the crowd, emboldened by the viral video and the public discussion, shouted collectively, "You're no Diana. Go home." The jeers were relentless, coordinated, and amplified by the tens of thousands watching online. The phrase became a refrain, echoing through the flashbulbs, bouncing across social media, and ricocheting through the corridors of the fashion world. It was a declaration, a confrontation, and a challenge all at once. Meghan's composure, though remarkable, faced its ultimate test. Every movement became more deliberate, every blink calculated, every step measured. The red carpet, intended to celebrate fashion, glamour, and public appearance, had transformed into a stage of emotional intensity, historical judgment, and cultural confrontation. The Duchess's navigation of this minefield would define not only the evening, but also the perception of her presence in Paris for months to come. Backstage, the reactions were immediate. Designers exchanged anxious whispers. Fashion insiders speculated on the fallout. Publicists scrambled to monitor social media and prepare statements. Even the royal family, thousands of miles away, reportedly monitored the unfolding spectacle, recognizing the significance of a confrontation that intertwined celebrity, legacy, and public perception. The evening, though only just begun, had already taken on a life of its own. And in the midst of the jeers, the flashes, and the whispers, Meghan's human reaction, the faint tremor in her expression, the blink of vulnerability, set the stage for the next chapter of the evening. The moment where backstage interactions, whispered confrontations, and unseen tensions would escalate the drama beyond the public eye. The red carpet confrontation was not just a test of composure. It was a prelude to the unfolding storm that would define her night, her public perception, and the historical narrative of her presence in Paris. But what happened next, when private conversations, backstage confrontations, and whispered challenges collided with public scrutiny, would push Meghan to the edge of composure, testing not just her poise, but her very emotional limits. The true intensity of the night was only beginning. The flashes of cameras, the jeers from the crowd, the weight of history, it all became too much. For Meghan Markle, the red carpet had been a stage, a performance, a carefully choreographed display of poise. But beneath the flowing white Balenciaga, beneath the carefully styled hair and perfectly polished heels, she was human. And humans break. It began subtly. A tightening in her chest, a flicker in her eyes, a hesitation in her step that no photographer could have missed. Her smile, once meticulously held, quivered. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The voices of the crowd amplified, the camera flashes blinding, and the words echoing in her mind. "You're no Diana. Disrespectful. Go home." Each one felt like a tiny stab, accumulating into a weight that pressed down on her shoulders, on her chest, on her very sense of self. Backstage, whispers traveled quickly. Assistants, stylists, and security personnel noticed the subtle changes. The way Meghan's hands gripped the strap of her purse a fraction too tightly, the way her posture stiffened, the way she blinked rapidly as though trying to maintain control. Yet even as they watched, there was little they could do. Public composure was a performance she had to sustain in real time, even as the private storm of emotions raged beneath. The emotional breakdown wasn't sudden, it was cumulative. Days of media scrutiny, the viral limousine video, the anticipation of arriving in Paris, the pressure of wearing haute couture for a global audience, the whispered comparisons to Princess Diana, the literal and figurative shadow she had been navigating. All of it converged in this singular, unbearable moment. Meghan's chest tightened with anxiety. Her throat constricted with the need to breathe, to speak, to explain, to apologize, or perhaps just to disappear. She forced herself forward, but each step was a negotiation between composure and the instinct to collapse. Inside, the turmoil was raw. Thoughts swirled uncontrollably. The limousine video, the public outrage, the relentless comparisons to Diana, the echoes of social media, the jeers from the crowd. Each thought carried an emotional weight, a whisper of guilt, a stab of self-doubt. Did she misjudge the symbolism? Did she provoke the crowd? Did she ever truly belong in the world she had chosen to inhabit? Each question was met with another, forming a loop of anxiety, fear, and emotional strain that seemed impossible to escape. And then came the tears. At first, nearly imperceptible, a glisten in her eye, a subtle dampening of the lashes. But they grew, slowly, inevitably, until she could no longer hide them. The carefully maintained mask of composure cracked, revealing the vulnerability beneath. Meghan's lips pressed together tightly, trying to stop the tremor of emotion. Her head bowed fractionally, a subtle attempt to regain control while shielding the world from the intensity of her feelings. Yet even in that attempt, cameras captured the faint tremor, the glimmer of human frailty that the crowd, the media, and the online world would interpret in countless ways. The emotional breakdown wasn't just about embarrassment. It was about grief over the impossibility of escaping history, the relentless scrutiny of public life, the pressure of being measured against a woman who had been mythologized and canonized by the world. It was about fear, the fear of judgment, of misunderstanding, of public shaming. It was about isolation, the sense of being surrounded by people, yet entirely alone in navigating the storm of expectation and comparison. And it was about resilience, the inner struggle to maintain dignity, poise, and control while being emotionally assailed from all sides. Observers in the crowd noticed the subtle shifts. Some whispered among themselves, trying to interpret the change in demeanor. Others were struck with a complex mix of emotions: surprise, empathy, schadenfreude, curiosity. For the global audience watching online, the glimpses of vulnerability became fodder for debate. Some framed it as a failure to maintain composure. Others saw it as a humanizing moment, proof that Meghan, like all of us, was subject to the crushing weight of emotion under intense scrutiny. Backstage, the atmosphere was equally charged. Designers whispered anxiously about what they had witnessed. Stylists and PR teams conferred in low tones, debating whether to intervene, how to manage public perception, and how to shield Meghan from further distress. Even seasoned professionals in the fashion and media industries admitted that the emotional weight of this confrontation was extraordinary. It was not merely a public appearance. It had become a trial of emotional endurance, historical sensitivity, and public judgment. Amidst the chaos, Meghan's own thoughts returned repeatedly to Diana. The comparisons, the history, the shadow that had been cast over her from the moment she entered Paris, all converged in the tight knot of emotion pressing against her chest. She thought of how Diana had navigated public scrutiny, media attention, and personal tragedy with grace, and she questioned whether she could ever measure up, or whether she even wanted to. The weight of expectation was suffocating, a pressure that pressed not just on her body but on her identity, her choices, her very sense of self. The audience on the red carpet, oblivious to the private turmoil, continued to judge and speculate. The jeers persisted, interspersed with flashes of admiration or curiosity. Cameras captured each subtle shift in expression, each blink, each tremor of a smile that struggled to maintain its intended poise. Social media amplified the moment exponentially. Clips of Meghan's eyes welling, videos showing her brief pause, memes juxtaposing the limousine video with the visible signs of emotional strain. The breakdown, though deeply personal, had become public property, dissected and analyzed in real time across multiple platforms. For Meghan, the challenge was compounded by the understanding that she could not fully retreat. Every step forward was under scrutiny. Every attempt at composure was evaluated. There was no private space, no escape from the watchful eyes of cameras, media, and the public. The emotional breakdown was not merely an internal struggle. It was a performance in which authenticity and poise collided under immense pressure. She had to navigate this intersection of humanity and spectacle with precision, awareness, and courage. In the midst of this struggle, there were moments of clarity. Meghan reminded herself of her resilience, of her ability to endure, of the years of public life she had navigated before this moment. She breathed deliberately, each inhalation a strategy to regain control, each exhalation a quiet assertion of strength. Her steps became more deliberate, her posture slightly more erect, her gaze steadier. Yet the tears lingered, a testament to the intensity of the emotional weight she carried and the difficulty of navigating public scrutiny under such extraordinary circumstances. The emotional breakdown also had ripple effects on those around her. Staff, security, and aides responded with heightened awareness, ready to offer assistance, guidance, or distraction if needed. Backstage, whispers of concern, sympathy, and speculation circulated rapidly. Fashion insiders debated whether the public perception of Meghan's emotional state would help humanize her or exacerbate criticism. Analysts predicted how clips of her subtle vulnerability might dominate headlines, social media threads, and commentary segments in the following hours. The personal moment had become a public phenomenon, a convergence of vulnerability, scrutiny, and historical weight. And yet, in the heart of the chaos, Meghan maintained a degree of control. Despite the tears, the pressure, and the judgment, she moved forward, navigating the red carpet with measured grace. Each step was an act of resilience, each gesture a declaration of composure, each blink a silent negotiation with the audience, the media, and history itself. The breakdown, while human, did not define her entirely. It was a moment of vulnerability that underscored the intensity of the evening, the weight of legacy, and the extraordinary expectations placed upon her. As the crowd continued to react, both jeering and whispering, Meghan's emotional struggle became intertwined with the narrative of the evening. The limousine video, the shadow of Diana, the public confrontation, all converged into a singular experience that challenged her emotionally, socially, and culturally. She was at the center of a storm that spanned continents, generations, and media platforms, navigating each with a combination of grace, awareness, and human vulnerability. But the night was far from over. What would come next? Backstage confrontations, private discussions, and interactions with the fashion elite promised to escalate the drama even further.